and good evening. My name is Nell Pepper, and on behalf of Harvard Bookstore, I am so thrilled to introduce this virtual event with André Gregory, presenting his new book, This Is Not My Memoir, in conversation with Cynthia Nixon. I hope you're all well and safe. Thank you so much for joining us virtually tonight. Through virtual events like tonight's, Harvard Bookstore continues to bring authors and their work to our community and our new digital community during these challenging times. Every week, we'll be hosting events here on our Zoom account. And just like always, our event schedule will appear on our website at harvard.com, and you can sign up for our email newsletter for more updates. This evening's discussion will conclude with some time for your questions. If you have a question for our speakers at any time during the talk tonight, please click on the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, and we'll get through as many as time allows. In the chat, I will be posting a link to purchase copies of This Is Not My Memoir on harvard.com, as well as a link to donate in support of this series and of our store. Your purchases and financial contributions make events like tonight's possible and help ensure the future of a landmark independent bookstore in Cambridge. We thank you so much for showing up and for tuning in support of our author series and of the incredible staff of booksellers at Harvard Bookstore. We sincerely appreciate your support now and always. And finally, as you may have experienced in virtual gatherings, technical issues may arise. If they do, we'll do our best to resolve them quickly. We thank you so much for your patience and understanding. And now I'm so pleased to introduce our speakers. André Gregory has been directing theater in New York for more than half a century. He has collaborated on film versions of his theater productions with Wallace Shawn, Louis Malle, and Jonathan Demme. Gregory, Shawn, and Malle created the now legendary My Dinner with André. Gregory is also an actor, a writer, a teacher, and a painter. Cynthia Nixon is an Emmy, Tony, and Grammy Award winner, best known as Miranda Hobbs in HBO's celebrated series Sex and the City. Nixon can currently be seen starring in Ryan Murphy's Netflix series Ratched, and she is in production on HBO's The Gilded Age. A lifelong New Yorker, she has been a longtime activist for better funding for public schools, abortion rights, and LGBTQ equality. In 2018, Nixon ran for governor of New York State, successfully placing issues of racial, economic, and gender inequality front and center and receiving 500,000 votes. Tonight, they'll be discussing André Gregory's new book, This Is Not My Memoir. Gregory recounts a life lived in the making of art, treasuring the process, not only basking in the afterglow of a product. His memories, including stories from the making of My Dinner with André and his groundbreaking theatrical production of Alice in Wonderland, travel across the world and the psyche and are by turns profound, gimlet-eyed, and surreal. Philip Lopate, writing for the New York Times, praises Gregory is a masterly storyteller and chronicler, eschewing the usual stale showbiz anecdotes. His perfectly timed narratives are spiced with wit, self-deprecating humor, and shrewd analytical insight. I am honored to turn things over to our speakers. The digital podium is yours, André and Cynthia.
Thank you, Nell. Thank you so much. Am I on and can I be heard?
Yes.
Very well.
Okay, great. I can't see André. I wish I could, but I guess when he speaks, I'll be able to see him.
I can see you.
Okay, great.
You look great.
Thank you. You look great as well. You look great as well. I love the painting behind you. This is a painting of, this is what my wife and I wore at our weddings. This is the designs of our clothes. What is the painting behind you?
The painting is by my wife, Cindy.
Oh.
Yeah.
It's fantastic.
It's beautiful. Yeah.
It makes me a little hungry. As appropriate. I wish we were having dinner right now, dinner with André and Cynthia. But we are here. This is the book. I don't know if it looks backwards in your screens, but this is
No, it looks great.
Okay, perfect. This is André's amazing book entitled This Is Not My Memoir, which he wrote with Todd London. And I'm so excited, Andre, to be talking to you and to be talking to you about yourself and about your book. And I have to say, I'm such a fan. I read the book as soon as I was sent the galleys these many months ago when we were going to be doing this in person. And I've reread it this past week, and it's the most delicious, astonishing, jaw-dropping, full of wisdom and full of extraordinary events that you can't even believe that they're true, and also so much insight and wisdom. And I think it's a book that I'm going to be returning to again and again, because it's just a great companion and a great teacher. I think this book is, as you are too.
Oh, bless you.
I love it. So, I have so many questions for you, but I wonder if you wanted to start by reading us a little of the book, maybe just the first chapter, the first short chapter, something like that.
I promise then it will be short. The book is short, which is nice. Yeah, okay. I'm not guaranteeing that I can see the print on the page.
Okay.
But I'll do my best.
All right.
When I was a freshman at Harvard in 1952, and actually, Cynthia, when I was a freshman, I lived right across the street, from the bookstore. The bookstore is one of my favorite places in the whole world. And every time I come up to Cambridge, the first stop is always that bookstore.
Well,
okay.
It's so fun I wish we were all there in person right now, but this is the best we can do in these times.
And it's not bad.
Not bad.
No. Okay. When I was a freshman at Harvard in 1952, I had horrible roommates and got slightly depressed. As a consequence, I moved into an awful, rundown hotel in Boston to avoid them. When I went for walks at night, I would pass the Old Howard, Boston's oldest and most famous burlesque house. I kept returning night after night because of a stripper called Princess Totem Pole. I called her the Antonin Artaud of striptease, after the mad French artist who envisioned a theater of cruelty. The princess had built herself a raked stage on which were great green abstract leaves she had painted. Upstage, there was a large totem pole with red lights that blinked on and off like eyes. She gyrated and bumped to the music of Ima Sumac. Two large blackbirds would strip Princess Totem Pole. They would peck at her clothes, and the clothes would fall to the ground. Eventually, I became the princess's assistant. One of my jobs was to feed the blackbirds. Actually, she offered me a job to go on the road with her. And I felt I had to go to Harvard. It was the biggest mistake of my life. I should have gone on the road. After telling people this story for years, I decided that it was so unbelievable, so outrageous, that it could not possibly have happened. I must have made it up. So I stopped telling it. My youngest brother, Peter, says there are 3 stages of life: youth, middle age, and you're looking great. I've reached the age of you're looking great, and it's all a mystery. Gloria Steinem cites a Native American saying that old age is like childhood, a time of wonder, because both are near the unknown. And what a wonderful life this has been, or at least it has been a wonder to me. So many stories. I can hardly believe it all happened. As the narrator of my favorite childhood radio show would say each week, incredible, but true. How true? Who can say for sure? Stories are slippery creatures, a bit like dreams, composed of what actually happened, filtered over time through the prism of selective memory. Given the amount of time, I generally rehearse the plays I direct, sometimes 4 years, sometimes as many as 14. My next play, Ibsen's Hedda Gabler, could be ready for an audience in time for my 100th birthday. As of this writing, I am 86 years old. Yesterday, as we were walking through a graveyard, my wife, Cindy, made me promise to live another 20 years. If I don't, she said, she'll kill me. And does it really matter if I complete the play? Isn't the joy of work in the doing? Isn't it the process itself that matters? Many years after I allegedly worked for Princess Totempole, I ran into a college classmate as I was leaving a restaurant. He greeted me warmly as if we were old friends. Then he said, "God, remember how I used to come visit you at the old Howard when you worked with that stripper? What was her name? Princess something or other? With those great big blackbirds?" So it was true all along.
Oh, fantastic, fantastic. I guess, I really wanted to start talking about the book, but since we're, virtually at the Harvard bookstore, and since that was about your Harvard time, I wonder if what you would want to tell us about, going to Harvard, and how did you feel about it, and were you thrilled to be there? Were you looking to
not
get
at all.
Yes,
I hated it.
Tell us what your experience hated.
Those were the days when teachers who were about 200 years old, they probably were about 30, but to an 18-year-old, they looked 200 years old. They used to read lectures at you, which was very boring. They'd done it year after year. I would say that the highlight of my first year at Harvard was that I fell in love. I fell in love with a young woman who actually was engaged to a Marine serving in Korea, but she was embarrassed to tell me. I was mad about her. We'd go to lectures, we'd go to lunch, we'd go to dinner, but as I'd never been hugged or touched as a child, I couldn't imagine that a brilliant young woman would really like me. So I never tried to hold her hand. I never tried to kiss her. One night, we were walking in this beautiful graveyard outside Cambridge. There was a full moon. And I think she probably thought I was gay because I just, there was nothing physical. She suddenly decided to go for it. She kissed me passionately on the lips, and I fainted. So I liked Harvard really for the Radcliffe women, certainly in my first year, but also, I actually got to hear T.S. Eliot, Dylan Thomas, and E.E. Cummings read their poetry live in Sanders Theater.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a time, and poetry was so important to people that they moved T.S. Eliot from a small theater, Agassiz Theater, to Sanders Theater. And so many people wanted to come and hear him read that they had to call the mounted police to keep the crowds.
Wow.
Yeah, it was another time.
Wow.
Where did you go to school?
I went to Barnard, and at Women's College at Columbia, and I took mostly classes at Barnard, but some at Columbia. And I have to say, we did have, particularly at Columbia, a few of those elderly gentlemen who would just read their lectures. They were interesting lectures, but you were very aware of the antiquity of the paper that they were reading from, and
right.
that you were maybe the 40th class to have heard exactly the same, and that their thoughts had not evolved. I want to leave and go on to the book, but will you just tell me, what did you study at Harvard, and did you use it in your career afterwards?
Oh, well, I studied English. My friend Wally went to Harvard because he had read the political books of a man called Henry Kissinger. And he so admired the work that he wanted to go to Harvard. So he got into Harvard. He went to his first Henry Kissinger lecture, and he was so nauseated by the man that he got out of political science and moved to English, like me.
Yes, well, English major over here too. So, okay. Well,
I don't know about you, but I kind of miss now having not majored in history.
Exactly the same with me.
We're made for each other.
Exactly. That is what I tell everyone.
Really?
I discovered history maybe more like my junior year, and by then it seemed too late to switch horses. But
Same with me.
I love English, but I realized that had I to do it over again, I would 100% study history.
Absolutely.
Yes. So anyone who's out there majoring in English right now, consider history, or
change
learn
now.
from us. Learn from us. Yes. So Andre, how did you decide to write this book about your life? And is it something that you had been contemplating for a long time? Is it something that people must have been pestering you to do for decades? But how did you actually decide to take the plunge? And was it a quick decision or a long decision?
Oh, it was a very quick decision, because people did tell me I should write a memoir. And because I do have some stories in my back pocket. But the one thing I knew was that I didn't want to write a memoir. I love to be in the present. I don't like to dwell on the past. And one day I took out a young man whose mother I had been nuts about when she was at Radcliffe. And she was the first woman to totally push me away. There was nothing I could do. But she did become a lifelong friend. And I took her son out to lunch one day because his mom had died. And I was telling him a story. And he said, "You should write a memoir." Now, I knew this guy, Will Schwalbe, as a wonderful writer. I think he'd written 1 or 2 books by then. One was a bestseller. And I said to him, I don't really want to write a memoir. And even if I did, who the hell would publish it? He said, "I will." He was an editor at Farrar, Straus Giroux. He offered me an advance over dessert. And there just seemed no way to turn it down. And then I plunged in.
Wow.
Quite intimidated,
And how long ago was that now?
How long ago?
Yeah.
I think 7 years.
Got it.
Yeah, I think the writing of the book took 6 years.
Right. And could you speak a little bit more about why it's not your memoir?
Well, the title is partly a joke.
Yes.
But it's also, memoirs, I think, either, incidentally, if you haven't read Carolyn Forché's memoir about her experiences in Central America, it's gorgeously written and it's very political and quite frightening. But I guess the other reason, I just didn't think it was a memoir. A memoir either circles around one particular event in your life, the gardener who molested you, or it says, "My great-grandfather Jaime and my great-grandmother Rebecca met on the shtetl one summer's afternoon, and they both decided to go to Lithuania to college." Both and it goes on and on about and I didn't want to do that. I knew I wanted a kaleidoscopic structure to a book. I didn't know what it would be. And Todd and Will helped me a lot with that. But I didn't want, I was born, I did this, I went there, I opened a show, it got a Tony. I mean, I have to say, unlike you, I've never received an award for anything. Well, I was offered a Lifetime Achievement Award by a little college in Alaska. And I said, I'm just too old to go to Alaska, but thank you very much. Where was I? I don't remember where I was.
You were talking about why it's not your memoir about.
Oh yeah. I think it's more a novel about an angry, uptight, aggressive, talented, mean-spirited, repressive young man who keeps getting fired from every theater he creates, who over a long time, changes into somebody who truly feels peaceful, happy, contented, in love. So it has the arc of a novel rather than a memoir.
I mean, one of the things that I love about I was interested that actually it does go pretty much chronologically, generally speaking, but there are so many of the thoughts and the sort of the gold nuggets that you've drawn from life, kind of sprinkling it throughout. And there's a sort of a little bit of for me, a little Virginia Woolfy kind of a thing about the book. Whereas even though there are chronological ideas, events that happen, it's also so much the swirl of ideas that you've picked up along the way that are woven in and out of it so beautifully. I guess I'm curious. It's as you said, it's not a long book, but it's very, and it's not dense in that it's like hard to read or something, but it's very potent, I would say. It's like it's distilled so that the flavor is very strong. And I wonder, when you wrote it, how you wrote it, and did you kind of write a lot more than is here and distill it down? Did you include things that you then cut, or somebody said, oh, you should cut the fat? Because it's kind of a book with no fat. And I wonder if you came to that naturally, or then that was a process of boiling it all down.
No, time. That's why I rehearsed The Master Builder for 14 years. It's all about time. In fact, I loved this thing I heard, that Michelangelo would sculpt a sculpture by getting a large piece of Carrara marble from Carrara, have no idea what he was going to do, and he'd chip away, and what was left was the sculpture. So originally the book, I think, was about 2,000 pages long. And then...
Really? That's what I was curious.
Yeah.
That's what I was curious. Yeah.
And then sort of with Todd's help and Will's help. What were you going to say?
And so you kind of got it all out there. And did you get it all out there by writing it or dictating it or talking into a tape recorder, or what did you do?
I talked into this iPad, which for me was already a technological achievement, because I'm of that generation where I don't even know the number of my cell phone. So just mastering talking into an iPad was something. And I talk, and then slowly over time, we weeded, we pruned, we chipped away. But it was a very long process. Partly, I guess, because I've always loved reading so much. I'm an inveterate reader with a huge respect for the spoken word. And incidentally, you were so good at the spoken word and so articulate, I think you should write a book.
Thank
You
you.
know, you know that I voted for you.
I do. I do.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, I think you would have been a great governor.
You know, I was thinking when Nell introduced me how important a comma is, because she said who ran for governor successfully
Right.
placing ideas of, you know, front and center. And it was like really important, you know, ran for governor, comma, successfully putting, as opposed to ran for governor successfully, you know, comma. But yes, no, your support was such a gift to me, such a gift to me.
Well, I would have loved to have had you in office for about 32 years.
Thank you. Thank you.
I mean it.
Thank you. You know, there's a part in the book where you say to your father very poignantly, it's one of this great leaps forward that you have in explaining yourself to him and him getting you, at least for a moment. You know, you say, I'm a learner. And he seems to understand that for a minute, because his grandfather he's just described his grandfather to you, your great grandfather, as a learner. And it seems to me, of course, there's so many fascinating, showbizy, artistic things in the book about your projects and about your successes and about your failures. But also there is in equal measure, I would say, kind of your spiritual journey and your search for spiritual truths. And I really wanted to ask you, most especially, do you feel that all of this journeying and learning and seeking and doing really off the wall things in both, do you feel like you were looking for the same thing in your art and your spiritual quest, or were they opposite, or how did they, you know, do they stand alongside each other running parallel, or do they merge, or how would you explain those two great questions?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I had no conscious interest in anything spiritual until probably I was in my late 40s. But my way of work as a director, and incidentally, there is no actor in the world I would rather work with than you. I thought, I thought your performance as Emily Dickinson was one of the great performances. I mean,
thank you. To have you there at the premiere was just so unexpected and so wonderful. It just made the night all that more magical.
Well, you know, as an actor, you have something that I particularly love, which I call the Iceberg Effect, that your work has such great simplicity that it's like the tip of an iceberg. You see the tip, but what you sense is the mile under the water of the depth, and your work's very moving.
Thank you.
Anyway, what were we talking about?
So you were telling me, you were saying that of course you didn't start to have any kind of a spiritual quest until you were in your 40s. But what I'm trying to understand is, are you looking for the same thing when you did stumble upon it? I guess because of your daughter, right? How do these things seem the same to you, or opposite, or complementary?
Well, certainly something they had in common was that if you rehearse a play for 2 years, or 4, or 14, and you're just watching and watching and watching and listening and looking, it's very similar to meditation. You enter a state of no mind. I never intended anything when I was directing. I just wanted to be in the moment with the actors. So there was a sort of spiritual process going on, even though I would have never called it that, never realized it was that. I think that the spiritual path itself might have begun with my being an Episcopal Jew. I was a Jew who was brought up as an Episcopalian, and my Judaism was denied. And when my late wife got ill, I started to work with rabbis and studying Hebrew, and a process just started. I mean, something you and I have in common, I think, is an unusual ability to change directions, you know, to be able to go from being a great actor to running for governor of New York. That's very radical. And
yeah.
Well, I'm going right from the top of my head, but I didn't, in the book, it talks about my leaving the theater for about 12 years. I think it was more that the theater left me, and it just went away. And I see that's ringing a bell. Does that resonate for you? Yeah. And I'd always been very impressed by reading that possibly the greatest actor of all time, Eleanor Duse, had left the theater for 12 years and become a gardener. And at the end of 12 years, she returned to the theater for, I think, a couple of years before she died. And people Lee Strasberg described it not as seeing a woman or an actor on the stage. It was like seeing light, just like seeing light shimmering on the stage. So somehow her path was a spiritual one to returning to acting, completely transformed.
And do you think now that you have started painting, do you feel, in terms of the theater, you're working on Hedda Gabler right now? Is that right?
Oh, the theater's on hold, as you know. We don't have
on hold. But do you feel, well, right. But I suppose we don't even have rehearsal. That's true. But do you feel that since you have become a painter, in addition to all the things you were before, do you feel like that's changed you as a director, as a theater person, I would say?
Well, I wouldn't know it until I returned to theater if I did. But I know that I have a great passion for painting. And painting is one of the most meditative things I've ever done, you know, because you just look, make a mark, look, make a mark. There's not a thought in your head. You're just there.
You know, in the book, part of what makes the book such fun reading is, you know, these early catastrophes that you have, these, and successes too, but these very ambitious, completely off the wall, enormous things you try, and some of them go like gangbusters, and some of them, as you say, you know, get you fired and get you, you know, they call the police on you. I always feel like when you're reading about somebody, particularly, of course, somebody who's achieved big things, to read about failures and early failures is so, it's always surprising, but it's also very inspiring, you know. Like my grandmother used to have in her kitchen a little thing about Abraham Lincoln, and it was called, you know, Feeling Depressed, Think of Lincoln. And it detailed, you know, these horrible setbacks that he had, you know, devastating, the death of his beloved and all of the elections he was defeated in, and he failed the bar, and, you know, just again and again and again. And, you know, I think it knocks us out when we think about people who've achieved such big things, but that they had this period when they seemed like there was so much defeat. Do you feel like, I mean, it makes for great reading and very inspiring reading, but do you feel like at times when it was considered you failed, how do you think that impacted you going forward as an artist?
Well, you ask great questions. I don't think there's any such thing as failure. You know, somebody once said to me that the greatest vegetables grow in shit. And I think we learn, my wife Cindy told me about some wonderful woman painter who gave a lecture, I think, and mostly talked, oh, I think mostly showed the works that had been, quotes, failures. But I don't think there's any such thing as failure. I think one thing leads to another. You know, if you fail, quotes, in love, that leads to your finding somebody even more wondrous. You know, it's all about learning. You learn, I think, from everything. I don't think there's any such thing really as failure, even though while your quotes failing or getting fired or being taken out of a theater in Philadelphia in a paddy wagon and dumped in New Jersey, it seems awful. It's an awful thing to be fired. And have you ever been fired?
No, I've never been fired per se, but I have a sort of a little funny story, which was that when I was about 26, so I'd already been acting for quite a while at that time, almost 15 years at that time. I did a television pilot, which I never did because I was a New Yorker and they were all in Los Angeles at that time. But I kind of needed the money, and so I went and did it. And it was a very well-written show, and it had great people in it. And I was playing a character who was a lesbian. And it was before Ellen. There weren't any, really to speak of, there weren't any lesbian characters. And it was like on Fox, and we kept thinking, like, can we really do this? And the writer, the creator, his sister was a lesbian, so it meant a lot to him. And apparently we did it and had great people in it, and it was pretty funny. And they showed it to Rupert Murdoch, and he said, we can't put this on the air. There's a lesbian in here. And so so I was supposed to be the woman who was dating the main character's daughter. And so they replaced me with David Schwimmer. And it was not a wildly successful show, but they got a season or two out of it. So I've never actually been fired, but I was replaced by David Schwimmer. And so whenever I run into him, we have this kind of weird special bond. So yes.
Well, you know, that reminds me when Wally and I were trying to find a director for My Dinner with Andre, as if anybody in the world would want to direct a movie about two guys you've never seen before talking. We took the script to Mike Nichols, and Mike read it, and we went there, and he said, it's an interesting script. I'd be interested in doing it if it were a man and a woman. Two men will not work.
Oh.
So it was a slightly similar thing. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I have to say, I don't know if you know this, but I worked with Louis Malle also.
Really?
Kind of, sort of around the same time. Yes. Louis directed a play that I did called, when I was about 15, called Lighty Breeze, which was a John Guare play that we did at the American Place.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. one of my first things on stage, but you know, such an amazing man. And you know, obviously
wasn't Louis amazing? Yeah. Yeah, Louis was amazing. Amazing. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah. And,
yeah, we had.
He did a gorgeous job. Yeah.
Louis and I had a wonderful relationship when we were working on Vanya on 42nd Street, because neither one of us, strangely enough, likes to talk very much, even though I look as if I love to talk and won't ever shut my mouth. But I don't like to talk in rehearsals. I just like to watch and laugh. I laugh a lot. So we would do a take of Vanya, and then Louis would look at me and he would go, and I would go, and he'd go right back to another shot. You know, it was completely nonverbal. We just knew how to talk to each other without words. It was great.
I wonder if you would speak a little bit about Wally. I mean, how long has your collaboration been at this point? It's something
50
like
years.
47 years or something like that?
50, I think. I think we've been
50
working together
years.
for 50 years. Yeah.
And would you just tell me, I don't know, anything you'd like to about Wally and working together, or how it's changed, or how you met, or the beginning, or just anything about the relationship?
Wally's like a brother, a lover, a father. He's sort of everything to me in the world. And I do think he's one of the finest actors in the world, one of the greatest playwrights in the world. And I think I do his plays mostly because I want to spend a lot of time with him. It's a wonderful relationship. In those 50 years, we've had one disagreement that lasted 12 minutes.
And how did you meet him? How did you meet him? How did you come across each other? I mean, I know he was a fan of Alice, right?
He was a fan of Alice. He came to see it many, many times. And I was working on Ibsen's Peer Gynt, which, as you know, is one of the longest plays ever written. And I wanted a contemporary version of Peer Gynt. And the writer, Renata Adler, said, you should call my friend Wally. He's, now I'd met him when he came to Alice, but I assumed he was a poet, which he was, but I didn't realize he was a playwright. And he was in a hotel in the Midwest, a hotel that cost $12 a month because he had no money and he wanted to write. And I think when I called, it almost seemed as if Moses was coming down from the mountain, And I said, I hear you're a playwright. And he said, well, frankly, my withered, pathetic hand can make its way across a page and write a word or two. And he sent me 12 plays that had never been done. And I was walking around the apartment saying, listen to this, listen to this. It was as if Wally was writing the plays that if I were a playwright, I would love to write. It was almost as if his words were my words. So I fell in love with his words.
But the Peer Gynt didn't happen. Is that right?
Peer Gynt didn't happen, but Wally took the longest play in the history of theater, and he worked on it for 2 years, and he came back with a 50-minute play that took place at a New York cocktail party. And that was
1-5 or 5-0? 50 minutes? 5-0?
50. Yeah. A very, very controversial play.
And you did it?
Oh, yeah, we did it at the Public Theater. And it's a wonderful play, Our Late Night. And the comic device in the play is that men and women at a cocktail party speak their thoughts so that if somebody is sexually attracted to somebody, instead of saying, have you read Henry Kissinger? They would say instead, gee, I'd really like to lick your tits. And that's all it is, an outpouring of volcanic sexual imagery. We got very good reviews for it, but the problem was the critics were appealing to a kind of 42nd Street porno audience. The audience just assumed it was a porno show. And so we got these really weird people who, they didn't want to see a play, they wanted to see a porno show. And one person in the audience got so angry with the play, he hit Larry Pine in the face. And
God.
Yeah, people would say, shut the fuck up, It was quite a dangerous environment in the theater. And that was the beginning of Wally's and my life together. 50 years, wow. It's amazing.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow is right.
Are there must be. I mean, you said initially it was like 2,000 pages, this book about your life. What stories did you take out that you kind of think, well, better for the shape of the thing, but I kind of wish they were in there? Did anything come to mind?
Yeah, one story comes to mind, which I thought of actually after the book was more or less finished, and my editor thought it was too late to put it in. When I was, I think, 14, living on the Upper East Side, there was a bookie. The elevator man was a bookie on the side, and I would bet on the races. I think I got 50 cents allowance every week, and I bet on the races, and I won the daily double, which I think means you've picked the horse in the first race and the second. I can't really remember, but I made a little money, and there was a radio show that I loved called the US Steel Hour, the United States Steel Hour. So I took my money from betting on the races and I put it into United States Steel shares. I was only 14. And so I sort of made a packet, and my parents took me to see Audrey Hepburn in her first play on Broadway, and Ondine.
Oh.
Yeah. And I fell so in love with Audrey Hepburn that every night I would send her a rose with an anonymous note that said, "I love you."
And
years.
Were you 14 at this time?
Yeah, I think so. And then years later, we were doing Alice in Wonderland at the Spoleto Festival. And after the performance, a lovely young woman who was obviously Audrey Hepburn's daughter, she looked just like Audrey Hepburn, came up to me to tell me how much she loved the work. And I said, "I'm sure you've been told that you look amazingly like Audrey Hepburn." And she said, "That's because I am Audrey Hepburn." And we went out to tea with her and her husband. And as we were leaving the restaurant after tea to go into the ancient piazza, I said to her, "You know, I'm sure you'd never remember this. It was such a long time ago." She said, "Are you the one? I've been waiting to meet you for years."
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, that was a story I would have loved to have put in the book.
Wow.
But I thought of it too late.
Wow. Oh, it's great. I have to say, it reminds me of a story of my own, which was that when I was a little girl, I loved Audrey Hepburn too, but I loved Carol Burnett.
Oh, yes.
I watched the Carol Burnett show, and I just thought it was the funniest, most creative, and the way she would just take those questions from the audience at the end, and do her ear. I mean, I loved everything about her. And I was a really little girl, and I remember the moment that I realized with horror that Carol Burnett didn't know who I was. And that was so shocking to me, because you know how it is with people on TV, even more than movie stars, they're in your home and you feel like they're your friend. And I felt like she was my funny friend, or my funny, honorary aunt or something. And then it was like, oh my God, I could pass her on the street and she wouldn't know that we have this relationship. It was really unmooring to me as a child. And then, of course, many years later, I was at Carrie Fisher's one-woman show, and Wishful Drinking, I think it was called. And we went backstage afterwards to congratulate Carrie Fisher, and Carol Burnett was there.
Oh, boy.
And she knew who I was.
Oh, my God.
And it blew my mind, I mean, it was like that. I think the person that you love and adulate so much as a young person, and then to have them turn around and actually say, "Oh, I love your work," whatever.
That's great. That's
right?
great. That's great.
It just means the world. So I guess I want to make sure that they're not telling me to move on to the audience questions. Can you tell me, you have so many, both in the theater and in your spiritual life, you know, so many great teachers that you learned from. Could you tell me who, you know, a few of who, two or three of who you think are the kind of the most important or the most impactful from this vantage point that you're at now?
Oh, I think Jerzy Grotowski, the Polish director, who was the Michelangelo of theater, and Bertolt Brecht, who was an even greater director than he was a playwright, even greater. And my Guru Mai. And my wife, Cindy.
Yes.
And my two cats, Putin and Felix. I watch the cats all day, and I wish I could be as spontaneous and as in the moment.
I know. I am embarrassed by the level of worship I have for my cat. I understand why the Egyptians, the ancient Egyptians, felt this way. It is very hard not to, you know, idolize them.
Oh, absolutely. Tomorrow I'll send you some pictures of my cats.
Yes.
And you send me yours.
What are your cats' names?
Pusheen and Felix.
Pusheen and Felix.
Pusheen is Gaelic for little pussycat.
Oh.
And Felix, even though he's about 16 now, Cindy goes all over the house calling for him. Baby boy, baby boy. He's never grown up for her.
My cat is named Aurora, but we did not name her that. We inherited that name when we got her because she was already, you know, an adult. But she is from Moscow, our cat originally, and so I wish she had a Russian name. I wish she had a Russian name. Tell me, how did you come upon the idea? I mean, I guess you rehearsed Alice for 2 years. Is that right?
Yeah.
But then Vanya, you rehearsed for 14. Is that correct?
No, Master Builder for 14.
And how long for Vanya?
I think Vanya was a couple of years.
Oh, only a couple?
Yep, only a couple.
Wow. And so
in LA, I once met that, you know, the director who used to direct movies in about 4 days, and Cindy, what was his name?
Roger Corman.
Roger Corman. Yeah.
Right.
And he did horror movies and what have you. And he said to me, I direct a movie in 4 days. What the hell do you do in 2 years? He was a lovely man, though. He was a very charming man. I still is, I suppose.
But tell me, what do you think? I mean, I guess in Chekhov's theater, they used to, I mean, the Russians they don't rehearse for years, right? But they rehearse a lot longer than we do in America, right?
Yeah, I think Stanislavski rehearsed for a couple of years.
He did.
I think so, yeah.
And when you started directing Alice, you know, for so long, I mean, how did you know you were going to do that, or did you just keep feeling like, oh, there's more to uncover?
Oh, well, Alice was very, very hard, because it really took its time, because what I thought, you know, Grotowski said that theater and film are often at war and in competition, and it's a war that theater generally loses.
Yes.
So you have to ask yourself, what is unique to theater? What is special about theater? And he said, to ask that question, you have to ask, what can theater do without? It can do without sets. It can do without costumes. It can do without lighting. It can do without music. The only thing it can't do without is one actor and one member in the audience. So once I'd fallen in love with the Alice material, what intrigued me was Alice has to drop down a rabbit hole, but there is no rabbit hole. A camera could easily create the feeling of falling down a rabbit hole. A rabbit runs by and he says, oh my ears and whiskers, how late it's getting. How do you make a rabbit without makeup or without a rabbit costume? How do you make a hole when there's no hole there? And how does Alice fall down it? She meets a caterpillar sitting on a mushroom. If you don't have a mushroom, how do you make a mushroom with nothing but other human bodies? So I was really intrigued by how to make something out of nothing. And it took a lot of work. It was hard.
I just noticed that Nell has actually sent me, Nell from the bookstore has sent me some questions from the audience. So I should ask you them. So here we go. A question from Marcus Parsons.
Hi, Marcus.
Hi, Marcus. Could you say a bit about your experience with Jerzy Grotowski and Company and about how it struck you and unfolded through your career so far?
Well, I would say get the book. There's a lot about it in the book, but if you were able to sit at the feet of Michelangelo and watch him sculpting, you'd learn something, a thing or two about sculpture. So he was a great master. I doubt there'll ever be another director like him. And also, there's a Hasidic tale about a man in a shtetl who goes to study with a great rabbi. And when he gets back, people say, what did you learn from the rabbi? What great news do you have to bring back? He said, oh, I learned nothing from the rabbi. Everything I learned was watching how he tied his shoes. So there's something in the actual presence of a genius, the way they are, the way they behave, the way they deal with human beings. That's where you learn, even more than their work.
I love the story about Louis Mal, just the thumbs up and thumbs down, because I feel like so when you have people who aren't really maybe so great in the theater, but they just talk a lot. They talk a lot, but when you're in the presence of the real thing, it. And I was involved in two different readings of the Seagull. Yeah. One was based on Tennessee Williams wrote a version of the Seagull.
I didn't know that.
Called The Notebooks of Trigorin, in which Trigorin is bisexual.
Oh, how interesting.
Sleeping with the young men who put up the, Treplev stage and stuff. But it's a weird, interesting play. But the director, went on and on about art and all of these words that sort of don't mean anything. And the other reading that I was doing, Mike Nichols was doing it in preparation for his production in the park. And Meryl Streep and Kevin Kline were doing,
I saw it.
Right, and Trigorin. And he just said, the Seagull is about the children of stars.
That's great.
It's it. And it's totally true. It's about when your mother is a very famous actress, your stepfather is a very famous playwright, and you want to be an artist, how incredibly daunting it is. And then, of course, Meryl Streep and Kevin Kline have children, and, they understand that it's daunting to have them as parents. Like, it was just so all you needed to know. It's like, just watch it, tie your shoes and get on with it.
That's a wonderful story.
Yeah, so great. Okay, here's another question. I read that you rehearsed, I don't know if this is true. I read that you rehearsed Endgame for 40 years. Is that true?
Well, it's sort of true because
So
I've done.
let me finish the question. And what has surprised you most about that play as you've explored it so deeply?
Oh, well, I've rehearsed it over for 40 years. I've done it. I've done 4 productions of Endgame, and I think it's one of the greatest plays since Shakespeare. But the thing I learned from it that I didn't know at the beginning was that it was about my father and myself, because my father suffered from manic depression, and all winter he'd be crying. And I would keep trying to pick up his spirits, to get him to stop crying, to see that the world was a beautiful place, which is probably the source of my work as a caretaker, which really goes into my work as a director, because I love actors. But there are these lines in the play where the son says, or the father character says, I knew an artist once. He was a painter and an engraver. I went to see him in the asylum. I took him by the hand and I led him to the window and I said, look, all the rising corn, all the masts of the herring fleet. He pulled his hand away, appalled. All he had seen was ashes. So I realized the play was about us and about him.
Another question from someone who, anonymous, doesn't give their name, asking us, you and I, Andre, how we met.
Oh, well, it was an awfully long time ago, as I remember it. I think you and I, when you were very young, went out for breakfast at the NoHo Star in NoHo in New York. And we had a lovely breakfast together. That's what I remember.
I remember I came to talk to you about doing the Master Builder.
Wow. That's what probably 40 years before I did it.
But I don't feel like it was, but that's so funny. So it's one of those things. It's like Rashomon. Who knows?
Who knows? Yeah.
Who knows? But I feel like we have so many, connections over the years.
We do. We do.
Through Wally and through other people. Yeah. So this is from Lila Giole. I'm sure I'm massacring that. Hello, this is Lila from Hungary. My question is for both Ms. Nixon and Mr. Gregory. What is the most unique thing about theater for you?
Oh, why don't you answer the questions and I'll just go turn the potatoes around.
Are you really going to go turn the potatoes?
Yeah, I'll be right back.
Yeah. Is that Cindy laughing?
That's Cindy laughing.
Hi, Cindy. I guess for me, the first thing that I would say about it is that it's mortal. It's finite. It's a living thing, and it ends. And of course, you can film a piece of theater and stuff, but it's not the same, obviously, as being in the theater, surrounded by people in the dark, all having the same experience together. For me, that's the most unique thing about it, that it's mortal, and then when it's gone, it's gone. My wife, when we were first together, she tried to get me to go to see movies in the movie theaters more, and I really hardly ever would, because I was so anxious to see the plays, because my attitude was like, well, the movies will always be there, but the plays, if you don't go see them right now, they're gonna die, and you will have missed them. Of course, I know it's true. Seeing a movie in a movie theater is a unique experience too. So I guess it's the mortal nature, but also the communal nature, because of course you can you can go to a museum, I guess, and be standing around with people who are all looking at the same painting or same paintings. But it's not like it is seeing a piece of live performance where you're all breathing as one, you're all laughing as one, you're all crying as one, you're all gasping as one. It's a way of being together with other strangers that's not, I don't know, that's just on a very sensory level. You don't know anything about them. You don't know their names or what they do or what they were doing that day, but you have an emotional and intellectual experience all together.
Me?
How about you? How about you, Andre?
Well, I think I love theater for many reasons, but for me, it's a metaphor for life in the sense that the actor is thrust onto the stage just as we're thrust into the world as tiny infants. You struggle for a couple of hours, just as we do with relationships and loved ones and children. And then the thing ends. And as with us, you're forgotten. You disappear, just as theater lives vaguely in the memories in altered ways of people who saw it many years ago. So it's like life and death, if that makes any sense.
You know, there's an actor that I acted with one time. We did Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf together, and he said when he was a young actor, he's a very handsome guy, and when he was a young actor, he felt he was like very stiff and very planned and programmed, and he was acting in some like summer stock kind of a place, and he would sit there in the wings and get ready and you know all the things he wanted to do and get ready to enter. And his director repeatedly, and he never realized it was happening, maybe he didn't do it every night, every so often, would stand in the wings, would actually lie down in the wings right behind him. And just as Brian was about to go on, the guy would hold onto the cuffs of his pants, his trousers. And so when Brian entered the stage, he would kind of trip, and all of his endless trying to nail something down would go, because he would just be taken out of himself. And it seems to me so many of your plays, particularly you're talking about Alice before, and I mean the stuff with the fire engine, like all this crazy stuff, that you start your plays, your rehearsals, trying to do something that you don't know if it's doable, and if it is, exact how you're going to do it. And that's what makes your theater so exciting and so alive. And when I was looking at My Dinner with Andre the other day, you know, this debate you and Wally have about being robotic, right? And about being dead inside and just acting from force of habit. I think it's such an exciting, it's what makes your theater your theater, Andre, so unique and so exciting, is that you start these things not knowing how they're going to work, but just, you know, going through in blind faith and ambition. And it's so, I don't know, it's so brave, but it makes for such an exciting result. Okay, we have anonymous attendee asks, what was it like acting in The Master Builder with Jonathan Demme? Was acting under a director's theatrical vision challenging or freeing?
Oh, Jonathan was really freeing, because if you were doing a take, out of the corner of your eye, you might see that he was roaring with laughter as you were dying. He so enjoyed the process of doing it that you felt safe, you felt it was fun, you didn't feel there was somebody out there who was going to criticize you. And he had great passion. You know, he would do projects like a long documentary about President Carter, just because he liked President Carter. You know, he had passion. He had great, great passion, and I loved that.
I think Nell is telling me she might come back on, and in fact,
here she is. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to both of you. This is just such a beautiful conversation. And thanks to all of you for spending your evening with us. Please learn more about this beautiful, remarkable book. And to purchase copies, you can go to harvard.com for copies of This Is Not My Memoir. And on behalf of Harvard Bookstore in Cambridge, have a good night. Keep reading. Please take care of yourselves. Stay sane.
Stay safe. Stay safe.
And I want to say we all want to have dinner with Andre. We all do. And most of us can't, but you know, you can make yourself a nice dinner and read the book. And it's the next best thing to being there.
Well, Cynthia, Wally told me when he heard you were going to do this, Wally said there is no one in the world you would have more fun with than Cynthia. And I thank you.
Well, I thank you too.
And I'll send you pictures of the cats tomorrow.
Please do. I will send you pictures of mine as well.
Great.
Okay. Good night now. Good night, Andre.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye.